Hi everyone, I'm Maria McLachlan. This is the video I was working on when I got distracted into making my last one. By happy coincidence, I guess this one has a similar theme, but whereas Ethel, whatever his name is, was defaming people as individuals in order to smear someone else, the article I'm looking at in this video is an attempt to link gender criticism to racism. Somebody suggested I do a video deconstruction of this piece by one Ilaria Michelis, which appeared as a blog post on the London School of Economics Gender Department website, and which has made a lot of people, including women of colour who are fighting hard against the dismantling of women's rights, very angry. All the more so, perhaps, because the piece appeared the day after our unelected second chamber made the horribly cruel decision to force women, prisoners, many of whom are extremely vulnerable survivors of violence and child abuse, to be forcibly confined with rapists, paedophiles and other violent male criminals who've decided they are women. There can surely be no better illustration of the inhumanity of gender ideology and those who defend it than that. But nowhere in this piece by Ilaria Michelis is there any acknowledgement of the harmful effects of genderism, let alone any attempt to excuse it. Now, you've probably never heard of Ilaria Michelis, and I'm not trying to poison the well, but I feel obligated to point out that she is a PhD candidate in sociology. I know. And it gets worse. She's actually at the University of Cambridge. Wasn't that the same university whose student body elected a women's officer who calls herself Milo and pretends she's a man? Yes, it is. It's also the university where a handful of the most senior staff, as I understand it, try to get a policy change forcing everyone to respect everyone else's opinion. Cambridge is evidently one of the top UK universities for making people stupid. Now, this Ilaria person is somebody who may well end up staying in academia or moving into a professional career and becoming influential. And that's the point of bothering, really. Before we look at her piece, though, I recently came across this document, which is highly relevant. Messaging Guide, Transgender Youth and the Freedom to Be Ourselves, Building Our Choir with a Race, Class, Gender Narrative. It's not about singing. Kathleen Stock described it as a PSYOPs manual. PSYOPs, according to the first hit on a search engine I found, are operations to convey selected information and indicators to audiences to influence their emotions, motives, and objective reasoning. Basically, this document provides confirmation that those who promote gender ideology cannot win arguments. However much they try to dress them up in science, the claims they make are metaphysical. As I have shown time and again, they don't stand up to scrutiny. A comment left under my last video is a perfect illustration of the best argument they have. This is boomer shit. Trans women are women, trans men are men, peace nerds, whatever dude, pass me that spliff. In order to win people over, that is not necessarily all people, because they know many of us are simply not that stupid, but those who, in this document, are referred to as the gullibles, oh, I'm sorry, they are referred to as the persuadables. That was a mistake on my part. They need to do one or more of the following. 1. Appeal to emotion, appeal to people's innate goodness, the kindness of their hearts. Easy enough to do on both sides of this debate. You'd think it boils down to a numbers game. There are many more girls who are distressed and uncomfortable at boys being allowed into their toilets and changing rooms at school than there are boys who claim to be trans and want in there. But that doesn't seem to work because the combination of the transgender label and the male child is likely to be seen as a child whose feelings matter more than those of girls. Number 2 is lie. We don't need to because the truth is on our side. There is a wealth of evidence that some men who claim to be women are no less dangerous than men who don't. Recently, some bloke made a few nasty comments on this channel. He obviously hadn't watched much, if anything, of my videos, and he asserted that I couldn't prove that trans-identifying men were a threat to women. I sent him to the crime page on my website, and I haven't heard from him since. And number 3 is piggyback onto other movements, genuinely progressive movements like the women's liberation movement and various anti-racist movements. It is the last of these that this document focuses on. As Kathleen Stock said, it is a manual with instructions on how to develop strategic rhetoric that positions transgenderism alongside anti-racism in particular. Now, Ilaria's article takes this marketing strategy, if you will, a step further by positioning gender-critical feminism alongside racism and white supremacy, and she does it very crudely and sloppily, as I will show. So let's jump in. The piece is called Recentering White Victimhood in the Age of Black Lives Matter, a gender-critical project. Note that the term gender critical is in quotation marks in the title, and the very first sentence in the piece is self-proclaimed gender critical feminists have grown increasingly loud within the UK political space over recent years. This is the point at which it is reasonable to expect the author to give a concise summary of the core beliefs of gender-critical feminists, but that would mean being truthful and objective, and the very use of those quote marks round the words gender-critical every time she uses the term tells us that this probably isn't a subject that she's capable of being objective about, and when you can't be objective, then it's very hard to be truthful. The subtext here is, gender critical my arse. That's just a smokescreen for the fact that you just hate trans people, or something like that. If she was unable to summarise gender critical views herself, she should, of course, have linked to my video doing exactly that, or she could have linked to the judgment in Maya Forstatter's case that found these views meet the criteria of being protected beliefs under the law, or she could have quoted from any of the press reports like this one from The Observer. Gender-critical beliefs refer to the view that someone's sex, whether they are male or female, is biological and immutable and cannot be conflated with someone's gender identity, whether they identify as a man or a woman. Correct. So that is the concise explanation Ilaria could have given, but omitted to. She could even point out that this is a view shared by some trans-identifying people, but I dare say that would be a step too far. Now, for the purpose of this video, I'm not going to say gender-critical feminist in full every time. I'll just say feminist or gender critic, because how can you be a feminist if you buy into gender ideology? Perhaps Ilaria will tell us. I have read every sentence in this piece carefully, and I find flaws in every one, but it would just take too long and be too tedious for me, never mind everyone else, to comment on everything, so I'm going to pick a few highlights. Firstly, there are glaringly obvious points to be made about the lack of evidence and lack of quality of her sources. In the first paragraph, she makes the claim that the last few months alone have provided ample evidence of expanding influence within government circles, non-profit and corporate environments. The governmental circles link leads us to an article in the very scholarly Pink News entitled So-Called Equalities Minister, nothing showing bias there at all, Liz Truss urges Tory government to pull out of Stonewall's leading LGBT plus employment scheme. I'm not sure that feminists can take credit for that one. She's doing what one would expect a Tory minister who doesn't want to see taxpayers' money wasted on rubbish would do. The only mystery is why none of the previous so-called equalities ministers thought to do it. The link about non-profit organisations is to an even more ridiculously biased anti-woman article on a site called Gal Dem. The article is about how a few non-profit organisations that support female survivors of domestic violence or sexual abuse, including the wonderful Southall sisters led by the legendary Pragna Patel, are pushing back against the challenges from hateful trans activists. Now, the corporate link, remember we're looking at this claim that there is ample evidence of expanding feminist influence, and to support her claim this is happening in corporate environments, she links to, The Times. Beats Prick News. Yeah, I remember this article from last June 2021 entitled "Critics Call for Law Firms to Quit Stonewall," and it starts by mentioning Alison Bailey, a black lesbian feminist barrister who is suing Stonewall because they allegedly instructed, caused or pressed her chambers to investigate her after she helped to set up the LGB Alliance. Alison's case, by the way, is due to be heard in late April, and let's hope to goodness Stonewall gets its arse handed to it. I'm never optimistic about legal stuff, but how can anyone who cares about gay and lesbian rights support Stonewall if it is doing things like what is being alleged here? So, 2 out of 3 sources Ilaria has used concern Stonewall, an organisation that has lost masses of credibility over the past few years, as so many former gay and lesbian supporters have turned against it. Also, 2 out of 3 of the sources she used concern women of colour standing up to gender ideology. She goes on. The impact of their rhetoric and political action has been and will continue to be devastating for trans people, from the halting of reforms to the Gender Recognition Act despite public support, to ever more intense levels of transphobic violence taking place online and offline. Everything is wrong with that sentence. The link is to an article in The Guardian in June 2020, but there is no link to the claim of public support for changes to the GRA. But deep in the Guardian article, we read about the government consultation, which drew 103,000 responses, that officials were said to believe that the results had been skewed by an avalanche of responses generated by trans rights groups. Indeed, I read the very careful analysis of the consultation responses, which is produced by the Government Equalities Office. In any event, it is disingenuous to imply that a majority of the public support gender self-ID based on responses to a government consultation, especially one that small. Then there is the extraordinary claim that abandoning the proposed amendments to the GRA is devastating for trans-identifying people. How? Many of them opposed these specific changes. Their arguments included that the proposed system would be open to abuse by bad men. True. The possibility of men taking advantage generates suspicions, and those suspicions will have a deleterious impact on trans people. Understood? It could destroy women's rights, safety and opportunities. See, some of them do care about women, and that the current system was proof that someone had been externally assessed. Okay, I can see his point. But Ilaria gives no consideration at all to the arguments made about how proposed changes would affect women and girls. That would undermine her purpose of vilifying feminists and other gender critics. The absolute worst thing, of course, is that she is directly blaming us for what she claims are ever more intense levels of transphobic violence taking place online and offline. What could she possibly mean by online violence. I have yet to see anything that comes close to the hate that is levelled at feminists by the cultists. This one was just a few days ago on Twitter. If she really believes that feminists are physically assaulting trans-identifying people in real life, she needs to provide receipts. If she believes our arguments in favour of our right are the cause of other people, thuggish men, for example, physically assaulting trans-identifying people, she needs to show her workings, explain her reasoning. She doesn't. We also learn from the first paragraph that Ilaria is curious to understand what are the secondary, less obvious but by no means less insidious effects of the deployment of gender-critical feminist arguments on contemporary UK and global feminist discourses. So you don't understand, but you've decided they're insidious anyway. Okay, and finally, more specifically, I explore the function of so-called gender-critical feminism. Let's just remind ourselves that so-called gender-critical feminism is the belief that the material reality of sex trumps subjective so-called gender identity, and this is important for the sake of women's well-being in every sphere of life, as a reactionary response to anti-racist and decolonial campaigns. What? How the hell can she see gender-critical arguments as in any way opposed to anti-racism and decolonialism, which aims to both reclaim the centrality of white women as the ultimate victim in public debates and to divert attention from calls to recognise and address the role of feminist movements in upholding systems of white supremacy and imperialism worldwide? An aim is an intention. So the accusation here is that we are deliberately setting out to present white women as the ultimate victim, and we want to divert attention from unspecified and unsourced calls to address the role of feminists in upholding white supremacy, etc. Why would we do that? And why white women? Gender critics care about all women and children, and indeed men who end up ruining their bodies and their lives and who live to regret it. How often do we hear genderists making horrible racist analogies between black women and trans-identifying men? Okay, that was just the introductory paragraph, and it sets the tone of the whole piece. There was the deliberate omission of the definition of her target, so-called gender-critical feminism. There was the use of some extremely biased sources to make questionable assertions and the use of very loaded terms. We can see from all that this piece has a particular audience in mind, and I am not it. I am not one of the persuadables, so I'm going to try very hard to be as calm and objective as I can in examining her argument. But for that, I'm afraid you'll have to wait until part 2 because I need a break. Bye for now.